Right now, a lot of people are feeling angry and powerless as we watch powerful abusers being exposed and nothing happening yet. Abuse is often protected and enabled by secrecy and power and social dynamics, whether it's in a household or in global networks. Even when large-scale abuse feels impossible to stop, speaking out and naming the patterns and refusing to stay silent are the ways that survivors and allies reclaim agency and disrupt these systems. In this video, I'll be sharing my personal experience with childhood abuse and exploring how the recently released Epstein files reveals similar themes within systems operating at much larger scales. I am going to be glancing just off screen as I make this video, looking at my notes because it's really important that I get this right. I'm not sharing my story for shock or sympathy, but because it shows a pattern that we still tolerate in society, and silence is a really big part of how that pattern keeps going at these different scales. This isn't about comparing harm or comparing experiences, just about recognizing patterns within systems that allow abuse to continue and understanding where the average person does have more direct power for changing these systems from the bottom up. A quick heads up that there are discussion of SA, childhood SA, a specific type of abuse. I am not going to say the full word because I'm not sure how much censorship exists on this platform, but if you're watching this video, I assume you know what that means. I'm not going into any sort of graphic detail in this video, but please do be aware of where you are and who's around when you're watching this. Don't watch it around children. What I'm going to be focusing on here is what happens around SA and inside families and systems, and how the responses and the silence that follow can be just as damaging as the abuse itself in a lot of ways. There's a lot of conversation when abuse shows up in the headlines or in these extreme cases, and that is really important. But less attention is given to how this is handled in families that look normal and look loving and functional from the outside. And that's where impact can be hidden, but still really deep. And it deeply matters because for most survivors, the harm doesn't stop with that original experience. It continues when they try to speak up, and that truth threatens a system that depends on their silence and denial for keeping the peace, whether that be in a smaller family system or in a much larger corrupt system. And I'm not trying to expose anyone or gain sympathy. It's really just about naming these patterns that still exist in the world and in millions of families. And unfortunately, my story is painfully ordinary in ways that people don't want to look at, but those of us who have lived this type of experience don't get to ignore it without serious consequences to our physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, social health and well-being. So my story. When I was a child, my sister SA'd me. What shaped my life as much as that abuse was what came after. As a kid, I showed my distress in the ways that a child can, in emotions, in anxiety and anger and scared. I was scared and I cried a lot, alone a lot. And at first I cried really loud, just hoping that someone would come and notice and help me and support me. But I really quickly realized that my emotions only made my family and those around me think that I was more of a problem. So I learned to stay quiet. And instead of being protected or supported, my feelings and my behavior was managed. And that looked like being told to calm down, being treated like my reaction to a messed up thing was the problem, not the messed up thing being the problem, or being shamed for my anger. and being ignored or subtly shamed when I was very clearly not okay. The focus was not on what happened to me or what I needed, but on keeping up appearances and keeping things normal and comfortable and looking fine from the outside. And as an adult, after years of therapy and healing work, I invited my parents into a therapy session to tell them what had happened, and most importantly, to draw the boundary that I did not want to have contact with this individual who had harmed me anymore. I wanted safety and support, and doing it inside a therapy session helped make sure that no matter what happened, at least the therapist was there to provide that safety and support. And that's not always the case. A lot of people disclose their stories and are not in a therapeutic environment or a supportive environment and have much different experiences than me. And so when I did this, I did not get protection or accountability really from them at all. Instead, the abuse was minimized, and like I was asked if it was just playing doctor. And that is so common to hear, that, oh, kids are curious and kids explore and that stuff, without it being thought about of how this is impacting the individual, and how parents have a responsibility to protect against these things. And I also experienced being told that my sister does love me, though, as if to like that should just excuse that, oh, she really does love you, so you should just get over this. And also having it come up about my parents, their fear of the consequences, and asking about mandated reporter laws. And it was so incredibly painful, and I really realized that the main goal needed to just be on focusing on creating that boundary, setting that boundary, that I would not be willing to be around the person who had harmed me. And in response to that boundary, my family began distancing themselves from me instead of anything else, and while still spending time with my abuser. And it became really clear that my pain was only seen as an inconvenience. And it doesn't stop with parents. When I told another adult in my family, her response was something about the Me Too movement and, oh, well, basically everyone's been abused, and asked if I tried to talk to her about it. And that response does a couple of things. It really flattens the abuse into something that is generic and inevitable, like, oh yeah, we've all been abused, so you should just get over it. Instead of calling out how deeply wrong this all is, that yeah, too many people have been abused. Let's not just normalize it and shove it away. Like, what? And it shifts the responsibility back onto the survivor to re-enter a potentially unsafe situation to try to find healing and to manage those relationships. And it's another layer of the system where this abuse is normalized. Speaking your truth is reframed as you overreacting, or it's minimized, and then the survivor is the one responsible for doing the repair and healing, often alone. No one tends to ask why the abuser isn't confronted or isn't held accountable, or what real accountability would actually look like. And the question becomes, why can't you just be easier or more quiet and get in line with the system? This is how silence spreads through families, through social pressure, and becomes normalized in society and allows the conditions for the abuse to keep happening in our society. And because of this, I opted out of family spaces entirely, like missing family members' weddings and other family gatherings, in order to protect myself, because I cannot reasonably demand that the person who harms me not be invited, and I'm not willing to put myself in environments that don't feel safe for me. And I also won't subject myself to questioning or judgments or narratives about why I'm there and avoiding someone or why I'm not there. And this is just another cost that people rarely acknowledge. When a survivor tells the truth, they don't just lose that safety. It's in order to protect themselves, they usually must also lose access to family and that sense of belonging that is biologically wired in as a need of ours. And instead, they must continue on, like spending holidays alone. And while family continues to remain in contact in support of those who harmed them, without ever having an honest conversation or a look at what happened and the effects of what happened. And that loss is just treated like collateral damage or evidence that the survivor is the one that's the problem. And this is really the system choosing comfort over truth. And this is what SA looks like when it's technically disclosed, but the system is not willing to face it. And it's not just about the act itself, it's about how families and systems protect their identity and their comfort and their story and their narrative, even if it costs them the person who was harmed. And this was not a one-time experience in my life. I, unfortunately, like so many other women, and it's not just women, I have been sexually abused multiple times in situations where there was threat or social pressure to keep me silent, and this is really common for survivors, and it's part of the whole issue here. So now zooming out a bit, I want to talk about how the same underlying power structures and dynamics can be seen at these different scales. So first is through power hierarchies, whether it's a parent and a child or elites versus the public. Second is enforcement of silence, secrecy, and control of information, hiding the truth, censorship, silencing, disclosure through fear, through threat, through social pressure, through legal loopholes or emotional manipulation, in order to maintain that system. And the third is normalizing complicity. So whether it's families or individuals, institutions, systems that choose to protect their own comfort and identity and reputation over addressing the harm. The next is minimizing and deflection. So this looks like blaming survivors, questioning survivors, questioning their memories, or creating excuses. And even when the stakes and the visibility is different at these different scales, it's the same pattern repeating at different scales. At the smaller scale, it's these dynamics happening in families, in schools, in churches and workplaces and communities. And at a larger scale, it's institutions and governments and global networks. And the mechanisms and the patterns are the same, if not extremely similar. It's the system prioritizing themselves, prioritizing the system over accountability and over the individual. And when the individual speaks up, they're the one that faces the consequences instead. Right now, a lot of people are furious, rightfully so, about powerful abusers being exposed and no one being held accountable yet. And there are also many individuals who are sharing their stories of abuse in their family and in other small community systems and settings. And they're furious that their abusers are also not being held accountable. And that anger makes so much sense and is so important to face and discuss so that we can try to move towards these necessary changes in the world. One thing about the discussion around the larger systems of corruption and abuse are that it keeps abuse at a distance. It makes it something extreme or rare, something that happens somewhere else to someone else. And what also needs to be examined is how these similar structures operate much closer to home. This essay and these things don't only happen in bad families. It happens in families that look normal and appear loving and functional from the outside. For decades and likely even centuries, survivors have been expected to stay silent so that the system could stay intact. And the Epstein files and these major things going on in our world right now exposes SA that was protected by denial and power and money and loyalty and silence. And my story shows SA protected by denial and loyalty and silence and power and so many of these same things. And it's the same, if not at least very similar, like I said, but with the same impacts when it comes to abuse being done on an individual and the harm that is created at different levels. And in all, this is how abuse survives in systems, in society. It gets minimized and reframed and legally avoided and emotionally denied and emotionally buried. And it becomes the survivor's problem to manage and to heal on their own. When I was asked if it was just playing doctor, that's the same thing as these bigger institutions trying to minimize or deny or avoid dealing with this type of corruption and abuse. And big cases let people believe that abuse is something that only other people do. But my story and the story of so many others really brings it home. Yes, this happens on these larger scales that must be dealt with. And this also happens inside families that look just fine. And what people rarely see are these consequences after someone speaks their truth. It's not just the trauma of the abuse itself, and it's the family denial, the emotional abandonment, being asked to protect the system over protecting yourself, and then being punished for protecting yourself or for telling your truth. That's what actually reinforces silence and allows for abuse to continue. And when someone is speaking their truth and telling their story, they are not just saying that this happened to me, they are really shining a light on how these systems absorb and protect abuse and abusers, and how truth threatens the stability of the system at the cost of the individual, and why survivors are often the ones that are pushed out and cast as the problem. Because abuse survives when kids learn early on not to disrupt the system, not to name what's happening, and not to make adults uncomfortable. But when survivors say, this happened to me and I'm not going along with the program anymore, that breaks the conditioning, it breaks the pattern. And that's what also helps change the world and helps change what other survivors believe is possible, that healing is possible, and it puts pressure on our systems to change. Abuse survives through minimization, and these systems have chosen to protect themselves before they protect victims. And survivors are punished socially when they try to tell the truth. And we should be furious, and we should be holding people accountable at the top, in the government, and we also have to look at the bottom, so to speak, the family systems, the societal, closer community systems that allow this to continue. And as painful as this is, it's also the black sheep and the scapegoat dynamic. When you speak your truth or you set boundaries in a family or a system that protects its identity, and keeps that silence, then you're the one that's cast as the problem. And it's so incredibly painful and difficult and isolating and can make you really question yourself. But being the black sheep means that you are the one that refuses to keep living in the lies and the dysfunction. And because you step out of that system, you actually have the highest chance of escaping and healing. The system can survive only if everyone plays their role. But when you refuse to play that role and you step out of it, then you are breaking the cycle already right then and there. And being the black sheep can really feel like it's some sort of punishment, but it's really a sign that you are doing the work that no one else is willing to or able to do. And you're choosing truth. You're choosing your boundaries, yourself, your well-being, and that is the path to real freedom and real healing. When we only look at abuse at the higher levels, it can feel really distant and untouchable. And this scale matters because it shows us where these systems are actually learned and rehearsed and enforced. In families, this is often the first place that people are taught whose pain matters, whose truth gets to be told, and what happens when you disrupt the story or the identity of the system. That's why examining abuse at these smaller scales is how we understand how it keeps reproducing, and it gives us as the average person more power to make change to these systems in the ways that we can. Right now, more survivors are speaking out than ever before, and every story that comes to the light helps expose these dark, corrupt systems, creating the space to dismantle what protects abuse and abusers and to build a better way forward. When we start holding truth and boundaries and accountability in our own families, in our own communities, we are not just protecting ourselves, we are practicing the same principles that can challenge abuse and corruption in these larger systems. Because change doesn't only come from the top. It begins in the spaces that we have direct power over, and then that ripples far beyond what we can see. And all of this is coming to the surface now because corrupt systems depend on silence, and that silence is breaking. And exposure is the beginning of the collapse, and the collapse is what makes space for something better to be built in its place. So to other survivors, if you were told, if you were told that, you weren't believed, if you told your story and you lost your family, then please know I believe you. There are many people out there who believe you and are here to support you. And if you were minimized instead of being protected, please know that that was not an invitation for you to try harder for them to get it. It was a choice that they made, and a very sad, painful choice. And if you walked away in order to survive, please know that that was not you being cruel or selfish. It was you choosing yourself and your survival and your self-preservation in a really shitty situation. And please know you're not alone. I believe you. I see you. I love you. And on a final note, by sharing my story and my thoughts in this video, I am not asking to be believed. I'm not asking for comfort, and I'm not available for advice or criticism or judgment. So please refrain from leaving those types of comments on this video. I will be blocking users who leave any comments that feel unsafe because my channel is a safe space, period. If you are a survivor and you feel called to share anything in the comments, your story, your takeaways from this, I welcome that because your story, your voice truly matters.